This is a response to David Pakman's video, Ben Affleck wrong, Bill Maher and Sam Harris weren't racist. It's a curious thing, I think, that when it comes to this, David Pakman, Maher, and so-called liberal Sam Harris, so-called by himself, referred to the same arguments conservatives make when denouncing liberals in order to argue that they are somehow true liberals. The Young Turks and the Majority Report went full blast against Maher and Harris. And who came to their defense? Bill O'Reilly. I'm just saying. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think David is in the same league as Maher and Harris. And, in fact, he's against anti-Muslim bigotry, which multiplies my disappointment. I have no idea why he won't criticize Sam Harris in places where he would criticize other people. But he should. And so this is why I'm making this video.
We've had so much controversy, Professor Sad, over this segment on the Bill Maher program, where Bill Maher and Sam Harris were issuing a critique of what they believe to be the dangers of extremist Islam, and Ben Affleck responded in a way where he felt as though the allegations made by Harris and Maher were some combination of racist, xenophobic, offensive, or unfairly disparaging Muslims, broadly speaking. And you
to address the racist argument, which we of course often hear, it is a truly astonishing accusation, because to be racist, you'd have to actually be attacking an individual's race. In this case, where they were critiquing an ideology, and that ideology, adherents of that ideology come from all sorts of races. Every possible race within the human race is covered under Islam. So it's really a buffoonish accusation.
So this is the conservative tactic of framing the debate in terms of race, saying race is shit, then acting all indignant when you call them a racist. Because as we all know, Islam is not a race.
Liberals have really failed on the topic of theocracy. They'll criticize white theocracy, they'll criticize Christians, they'll still get agitated over the abortion clinic bombing that happened in 1984.
Did Sam Harris just call Christian theocracies white theocracies? Did he call white a religion? I've heard of Islamic religion and Christianity, but I've never heard of this white religion. So never mind that Sam Harris frames things in terms of race. And also disregard when he said about Reza Aslan, quote, I don't know what his agenda is, beyond writing a stream of white guilt from interview to interview, but he's manipulating liberal biases for the purpose of shutting down conversation on important topics. Liberals don't want to criticize blacks, I mean Muslims, because of white guilt? What about us liberals that aren't white? Tell me, who accuses white people of having white guilt? No, but Sam Harris is a liberal. It's just a coincidence that he uses terms made up by conservatives to get liberal white people to capitulate to their bullshit. But Sam Harris is not at all making this about race. But if you watch David Pakman's show, like I have for a long time, you might never have guessed that Islam is not a race. Let's count how many times David mistakes Islam for an ethnicity/race in this video.
White terrorists are called gunmen. What does that even mean? A person with a gun? Wouldn't that be like everyone in the U.S. who owns guns? Other terrorists are called terrorists. Very, very good point.
Yeah, definitely.
Number two, white terrorists are always troubled loners. Other terrorists are suspected of being part of a global plot, even when they're obviously just troubled loners. We saw that with the underwear bomber. We saw that as we researched further into Fort Hood. There's always the assumption that when it's non-white, it's part of a conspiracy. Right. No question about it.
Pause here. He refers to the underwear bomber and the Fort Hood shooter as non-white. Okay, the underwear bomber was black, so far so good. What was the race of the Fort Hood shooter? Was it Islamic? He was white. He was a Muslim, and he was white. Okay, David? Those two things can go together. And you don't need to bring some condescending jackass on your show to explain to us that Islam's not a race. But maybe you should pay more attention.
Doing a study on the danger of white terrorists at the Department of Homeland Security would get you sidelined by angry white congressmen. Doing studies on other kinds of terrorists is guaranteed promotion. What we're alluding to here is Peter King, congressman from New York's hearings on dangerous American Muslims, completely ignoring the countless incidents of white domestic terrorism in the United States.
Again, Islam is not a race.
By Christians.
in many cases by Christians. The family of a white terrorist is interviewed, weeping as they wonder what went wrong. The families of other terrorists are almost never interviewed. Absolutely. I mean, think about the underwear bomber. Was there any effort to talk to his family and to give their side of the story and the impact that this may have had on them? There's not even a remote interest in seeking out that story. No question about it. White terrorists are always part of a fringe. Other terrorists are apparently mainstream. White terrorists are random events like tornadoes. Other terrorists are long-running conspiracies. Again, part of that same thing. White terrorists are never called white. Other terrorists are given ethnic affiliations. Absolutely, which we've been talking about. Muslim extremist terror.
Right.
Common.
Whoa, 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 David. Islam is not an ethnicity. It encompasses all races and ethnicities. Sheesh.
White terror? Did we hear white terror when it was the Aurora, Colorado Batman shooting? No, we didn't hear that. We didn't hear that with the Sikh shooting. We're not hearing that with this one.
Right. Usually just hear the age along with gunmen.
Absolutely. Nobody thinks white terrorists are typical of white people, but other terrorists are considered paragons of their societies. Absolutely. When you hear of a Muslim terror incident, it's very common to hear people saying, you know, it's Muslims. It's Muslims. Muslims are the problem. In fact, the Peter King hearings are based on that exact fact. However, you never hear white people are the problem. White people are terrorists.
Yeah.
You just don't hear that.
Right. I think, unfortunately, for most Americans, because of the portrayal in the media, even when you just say terrorist, the first thing to come to mind is someone
who's
foreign,
not white,
someone Muslim,
right?
Whatever.
Okay, last two. White terrorists are alcoholics, addicts, or mentally ill. We're already seeing that with Thomas Kafal. And other terrorists are apparently clean living and perfectly sane. Right. We never talk about the mental stability of any Muslim terrorist when we hear about the underwear bomber, or we hear about what goes on overseas. It was discussed a little bit with the Fort Hood shooting. I think that in that case it did come up at least in some kind of tangential way.
Jesus, David, how many times do I have to tell you Islam is not a race? You're worse than Ben Affleck, seriously. With a bad case of white guilt on the side.
I also found it interesting, and you addressed this in your article, where the defense that was used at one point by Ben Affleck was that the majority of Muslims don't commit violence. And of course, when we, in the U.S., we seem to have predominantly domestic terror in the United States is predominantly committed by white Christian men. That's just what it happens to be, factually speaking. And of course, it's never implicit that all white people or all men or all Christians are the problem, but it doesn't make anybody a bad person or a racist or a xenophobe merely to point out that, factually speaking, that's what it is. And a lot of people will say, well, David, why do you get so mad when people talk about black on black violence? And there, it's because that is a myth with which we have actually debunked, statistically speaking. But I'm kind of getting off course a little bit. I want to go back to your addressing of this issue. What did it mean to you when Ben Affleck said, but most Muslims are not violent?
I think it comes from a natural tendency for people to use personal experience to shape their worldview, right? So most of us interact with all sorts of people, most of whom are lovely. So I may have Muslim students, all of whom are lovely, Muslim colleagues, Muslim friends. And so my personal experience suggests that that narrative, that there are these Islamic-based, violent acts, doesn't correspond to my reality. And so since most of us have this tendency to use our personal experiences, then you get a conflation, if you'd like, between some statistical regularities and one's lived experiences. So, you don't have to have 1.5 billion Muslims beheading people for you to draw a link between some Islamic teachings and violence, right? Rape is committed by men, yet most men are non-rapists. But to make the statement, the very obvious statement, that rape is a male crime doesn't make you manphobic. It doesn't make you hateful. It doesn't make you a Nazi. It makes you someone who is able to navigate through statistical regularities. So I think that's the issue, is that most of us, our personal lives are not congruent with this idea that Islamic-based violence exists. And so we want to be tolerant, we want to be kind to others, and so we recoil at this possibility. And so that's exactly what happened with Ben Affleck.
Here are some more liberals making that argument.
Almost like our debate on training wheels. That was our debate 7 weeks ago.
Sure.
And they can't handle the give and take of a debate. They were outraged that somebody was saying there's a reason there was a certain group of people that attacked us on 9/11. It wasn't just one person, it was one religion. Not all Muslims are terrorists, but all terrorists are Muslims. If you watch
I say now what we have to say, but surely it's redundant, that most Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims, are not terrorists and who despise and reject terrorism. Of course they do. These are my friends, your friends, the people we work with and live next door to. But we're not idiots. We know the dangers of generalization, and we don't imply or believe or state that all Muslims are terrorists. We never do that. That would be crude and dumb and absurd. But simultaneously, we have to say without fear of attack that most terrorists are Muslim. Let me make it plain and clear. Okay, Mr. Trudeau, okay, CBC, okay, Toronto Star, listen, the vast majority of Muslims are not terrorists, but the vast majority of terrorists are Muslims.
Well, right, and she also couldn't give an example of a Christian terrorist attack.
Yeah, no, I mean, there haven't been any, so that's probably why she couldn't do it.
And I think the main beef is that when there's a terrorist attack in this country, the media automatically goes to, well, was it a Muslim? And these people here don't like that.
Why?
They feel,
but it's always a Muslim.
It is
Not
always a Muslim.
I mean, we had the Unabomber and things like that.
True.
But recently, it's always been
It is always
the
a Muslim,
jihadists.
right? But they said this: if there was a guy running around America, mass murdering people, and calling himself a Christian, we wouldn't say this guy's Christian. He's unchristian.
The liberal press would go wild with
exactly,
that.
but a real Christian would say that guy.
There sometimes is a broad indictment of religion in general, but if you look today, you do see that while the vast majority of Muslims are by no means terrorists, it does seem that the vast majority of terrorist incidents do involve some aspect of the Muslim world. You don't see a whole lot of Buddhist suicide bombers. I'm still waiting for the Koreans to show up.
And also that they...
If these right-wingers had said that on his show, David Pakman would have nailed them to a wall. But since it's in the defense of Sam Harris, that's okay. It's encouraged even.
As you say, we have 1.5, 1.6 billion Muslims. Now,
second biggest religion in the world, a quarter.
Well, Ben, let me unpack this. Let me unpack this for you.
Please do.
We have just imagine some concentric circles here. You have at the center, you have jihadists. These are people who wake up in the morning wanting to kill apostates, wanting to die trying. They believe in paradise. They believe in martyrdom. Outside of them, we have Islamists. These are people who are just as convinced of martyrdom and paradise and wanting to foist their religion on the rest of humanity, but they want to work within the system. They're not going to blow themselves up on a bus. They want to change governments. They want to use democracy against itself. Those two circles arguably are 20% of the Muslim world. Okay.
I'm too tired to argue against this. I'll just let a certain... Wait, how do you pronounce this? David Pakman. Did I say it right? I'll just let that dude debunk it.
Well, the overwhelming majority of those who consider themselves Muslim are not violent, right? This is the problem I have with. I think that when you on one hand you say you don't want to generalize, but on the other hand you're making the generalization that most Muslims or even a significant portion of Muslims are violent. There is extremism in all religions. We cover it extensively on my program, but it is the exception. There is nothing specific about what Muhammad said in the Quran or what Jesus said in the New Testament or whatever the case may be that makes people violent, but these sacred texts can be used by anyone who wants to do violence.
Well, let's imagine, because there are no statistics on this. There is polling data that periodically comes out of the Muslim world, but it doesn't give us a handle on how many people are violent and how many people are nonviolent. However, if only 1/10 of a Muslim world of 1.8 billion people tended toward violence.
But even that is absurd, Howard. 1/10, 1 in 10 people is violent based on their association with Islam. I mean, David, I think it's absurd.
Yeah, well, liberals have really failed on the topic of theocracy. They'll criticize white theocracy. They'll criticize Christians. They'll still get agitated over the abortion clinic bombing that happened in 1984. But when
liberals. I wonder what David has to say about this.
Planned Parenthood was firebombed. If you haven't heard of this, don't be surprised. It's because the media, especially the right-wing media, has been almost completely silent about it. A potential incident of domestic terrorism took place, and it gets barely more than a yawn from most of the press. Someone firebombed a Planned Parenthood clinic in McKinney, Texas, late on Tuesday night. Luckily, because it was so late, no one was hurt. Maybe you heard about it on a liberal blog. Probably not a newspaper, probably not a cable news channel, absolutely not on any right-wing blog, which is a little odd considering how much attention terrorist attacks get in this country. Don't they, Lewis? I mean, the media typically obsesses about terror attacks.
Of course.
However, there isn't evidence any Muslims were involved. Maybe we don't care as much. It's 2011, ladies and gentlemen. What argument can be made when Republicans try to attack contraception other than they want to control women's bodies? There is a misogynistic nature to many of these proposals that is very clear. Men want to control women's bodies. That's what is there for many. For many, it's the religious component, absolutely. Imagine if the target of this attack had been associated with the right. Imagine for a second, Lewis, that Marcus Bachmann's anti-gay therapy clinic, let's just say it was some diesel fuel in a glass bottle going through the window at midnight with no one hurt. This would be a major national story, and you know it, Lewis.
Of course.
It would be wall-to-wall coverage, even if no one was hurt, even if the attacker's identity was still unknown. It's even easier to imagine that if anyone had any reason to suspect a Muslim had been involved in this attack, it would not only be a major news story for days, it would be the subject of congressional inquiries, it would be maybe even an air war. Who would we bomb if there was evidence that this same attack was perpetrated by a Muslim, Lewis?
So that was a clip of David getting agitated over a firebombing in 1984. What a liberal bitch. Shit, David, don't get your panties in a bunch. Those never happened post-1984. So saith Sam Harris.
Was it offensive, what Sam Harris and Bill Maher were saying, or was it not?
Absolutely not. I think that in a pluralistic setting, as is the case in Western liberal democracies, any ideology, whether it be communism or any religious belief or any scientific theory, nothing is not within the purview of criticism and debate. And so the idea that some religions it would be progressive to criticize, while others it would be racist, is simply contrary to the whole bedrock on which our societies are founded on. And to address the racist argument,
this is a big fat man made out of straw, ladies and gentlemen. Whoever said some things are beyond criticism?
Like all men are created equal.
Ben, we have to be able to criticize bad ideas. And
of course we do. No liberal doesn't want to criticize bad ideas.
But Islam at this moment is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Jesus.
So
we should be able to criticize? We are able to criticize. Who says you shouldn't be able to criticize? Why does every address by Sam Harris to liberals start with, we should be honest, we should be able to say, as if we're all a bunch of liars not arguing what we actually believe? He blames political correctness for lack of profiling. The reason I oppose profiling Muslims is not because I'm afraid of being called a bigot if I do. I don't even oppose it necessarily because it's a violation of their rights. I oppose it because it doesn't work. We need to be able to say that Muslims are the most violent by far without being criticized. I'm sorry, who entitled you to this? Why should your ideas be immune from criticism? And what the fuck parallel universe do you live in where Islam is not seen by the majority of Americans as an inherently violent religion? Quote, at this moment in history, there is only one religion that systematically stifles free expression with credible threats of violence. The truth is, we have already lost our First Amendment right with respect to Islam, and because they brand any observation of this fact a symptom of Islamophobia, Muslim apologists like Greenwald are largely to blame. So okay, we have the legal right, but you don't feel safe because of the politically correct law enforcement in this country refuse to look into Islamic violence and radicalization.
After outrage in the Muslim community over secret NYPD reports of spying, new details emerge on sources of funding used to fuel the New York Police Department's operations.
So I would refer you to the HIDTA program, which is the place that makes money specifically available to law enforcement.
Millions of dollars apparently came from the White House, part of a grant called HIDTA, High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Program. It's intended to help local police departments fight drugs. But in this case, the funds paid for cars that plainclothes officers used to spy on Muslims, computers that stored information about Muslim students, social events, and mosque sermons.
I feel violated, of course. No one has the right to invade my privacy, and they have done that.
The NYPD's covert operations has sparked widespread anger amongst Muslims and complicates the Obama administration's counterterrorism efforts. Although the White House declined to comment on the specifics of the program, Press Secretary Jay Carney was quick to point out the administration's support of Muslims.
We make very clear that we consider Muslim Americans partners in the effort to combat radical extremism.
New York Police Commissioner Ray Kelly defends the operation and maintains the NYPD will continue its intelligence efforts. Politicians from both sides of the Hudson have chimed in. New York Senator Chuck Schumer said he doesn't see anything wrong with the NYPD's efforts. And Governor Andrew Cuomo said he doesn't believe there's any reason to second-guess the NYPD's methods. While both New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and Newark Mayor Cory Booker expressed concerns as to why they had no knowledge of the operation. Christie even asked New Jersey's Attorney General to look into the matter to see if the NYPD reached outside of its jurisdiction. In New York, Bonnie Ghosh, Associated Press.
As it stands right now in the U.S., Reza Aslan is more likely to be killed for what he is saying than for Sam Harris to be killed for what he's saying. Not to say that it's likely for Aslan to be killed, but there's more anti-Muslim hate crimes and more right-wing terrorism in this country than Islamic terrorism and violence. And actually, there's been a spike in anti-Sikh and anti-Hindu violence in the U.S. because they're being confused with Muslims. Please explain to the far right that Islam is not a race. And the left-wing terrorism in this country is largely eco-terrorism, in case Sam is afraid of hippies too. And if you didn't catch that in the video, Chuck Schumer and Governor Cuomo are Democrats. If even the so-called liberal party in the U.S. is behind you, like, what the fuck more do you want, Sam? Whenever people are defending Sam Harris, except conservatives, they always say that he's being taken out of context. I think they don't understand what he's arguing. And proof of this, when you ask his defenders, what do you do about this? They never point to any of his solutions. When you point out that he's in favor of profiling, they say, well, I disagree with him on that. Since he received a giant backlash from his fans for defending profiling, he's offered no policy solutions. Quote, I once wrote a short essay about airline security that provoked a ferocious backlash from readers. In publishing this piece, I'm afraid that I broke one of my cardinal rules of time and sanity management. Not everything worth saying is worth saying oneself. I learned this the hard way once before in discussing the ethics of torture and collateral damage. But this time, the backlash was even more unpleasant and less rational. Sam Harris offers no policy solutions aside from the occasional, I was against the Iraq War, see? I'm a liberal. That's a liberal stuff, right? The only time he ever gives a political position is to claim that he's got some liberal cred. I'm in favor of raising taxes on the rich. Great. How does that help with Islam? A month ago he wrote an article called Sleepwalking Towards Armageddon about Obama's response to ISIS, hinting that airstrikes weren't enough. But is he ever going to say anything of substance? What kind of a coward do you take him for? A brave one? Willing to face his critics? There's a theme in Sam Harris's work that belief determines behavior that I want to address. Beliefs about reality don't determine behavior. If everyone believes in gravity, does that mean no one's ever going to jump off a bridge, or out of a plane, or off a building? I would consider your beliefs to be the most skewed of all, given that you don't believe in free will, and you're a moral realist, which, as far as I'm concerned, makes you no different than many religious people. I'm not using religious as an insult, if anyone's concerned, like so many other atheists do. I'm just saying that believing that certain moral propositions can either be true or false seems a lot more like Islam and Christianity and religions that believe that there's a moral order to the universe. I don't say your insane political positions are a result of your specific type of derangement, that you don't believe that you are in control of your own actions. And I'm not saying that to any determinists out there that you are deranged. It's hyperbole. I'm trying to get my point across that you can have fundamentally different beliefs and disagreements about reality, and that doesn't make one some deranged lunatic. I'm not blaming Sam Harris's bigotry on anyone or anything but himself. Oh, and Sam Harris is apparently gonna be appearing in an interview with Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks. There is almost like a 0% chance that he won't be asked about his political positions. Maybe he grew a spine, maybe he's still a coward. My money's on coward.